"Your daughter should have been safe here, and she wasn't." Those were the words New Zealand's Prime Minister spoke after Grace Millane's body was found buried in bushland outside Auckland. It was an apology to her family, but it also captured the horror of the case in one sentence. Grace was not vanishing into some lawless wilderness. She was a 21-year-old British backpacker on a Tinder date in the center of a modern city filled with cameras, bars, taxis, hotels, and people. And yet by the time her family woke up on her birthday, she was already dead. Grace Emmy Rose. Millane had graduated from the University of Lincoln with a degree in advertising and marketing, and set off on the kind of year-long trip many graduates dream about before adult life fully begins. She had traveled through South America, kept her parents and brothers updated with photos and messages, and arrived in New Zealand on November 20th, 2018. She spent time traveling through the North Island before returning to Auckland on November 30th and checking into a backpackers hostel in the city center. By every account, she was excited, independent, affectionate with her family, and exactly where she wanted to be. That Friday night, November 30th, she matched with a man on Tinder. His name was Jesse Kempson. By the following evening, Saturday, December 1st, they had agreed to meet in Auckland's Sky City Entertainment District. Court records later showed that the timeline between 5:45 p.m. and 9:40 p.m. could be reconstructed with unusual precision through CCTV, bar receipts, and messages Grace sent to friends. At first glance, it looked like an ordinary date. They moved between bars, drank together, laughed, kissed, and appeared to be getting along well. That normality would later become one of the most disturbing things about the case. At 5:37 p.m., Grace left the hostel and headed towards Sky City. She took a photo of a Christmas tree outside, the last message her family would receive from her. The pair started at Sky City, then moved through Central City bars before ending up at the Bluestone Room. CCTV later showed them kissing there. At 9:40 p.m., they crossed from the bar into the City Life Auckland building, where Kempson was staying, and took the elevator to his floor. That was the last confirmed footage of Grace alive. What happened inside that apartment became the core battle of the trial. One fact was never really in dispute. Jesse Kempson caused Grace's death by applying manual pressure to her neck. New Zealand's Supreme Court later summarized the case by noting that between 9:40 p.m. on December 1st and 1:29 a.m. the next morning, he killed her in his apartment. The significance of 1:29 a.m. came from his own internet activity. That was when he searched Waitakere Ranges, the area where he later buried her body. 6 minutes later, he searched Hodest Fire. The court said there was no innocent reason for those searches unless Grace was already dead. And that is where this case turns from tragic to chilling. Because what followed was not the behavior of a man in chaotic panic. It was the behavior of someone beginning to manage a crime scene. Between 1:46 a.m. and 1:49 a.m., Kempson took intimate photographs of Grace's body. Other evidence presented at trial showed a wider pattern of internet searches during those hours and later that morning, including searches for rigor mortis, extra-large bags, carpet cleaner, Waitakere Ranges, flesh-eating birds, and are there vultures in New Zealand? Prosecutors said those searches, combined with the photographs, revealed coldness, calculation, and a mind focused not on calling for help, but on concealment. The next day was Grace's 22nd birthday. Back home in England, her family sent birthday messages. No reply. That, by itself, was deeply out of character. Grace had been in close contact throughout her trip, sending photos, updates, and details of where she was going. Her family later said that silence on her birthday was the moment alarm became something much more serious. By December 5th, they contacted Auckland police and reported her missing. At first, investigators did not publicly describe the case as a homicide, but behind the scenes, CCTV was already telling a far darker story. That CCTV became one of the defining features of the case. In many murder investigations, detectives are forced to build the victim's last hours from phone pings, witness memory, and partial guesswork. Here, a large part of the evening was preserved on camera. Police quickly established that Grace had entered city life with Kempson at 9:41 p.m. and, crucially, had never been seen leaving. New Zealand police publicly stated on December 8th that their inquiries had produced no further confirmed sightings after that point. That was the moment the case shifted decisively. The last known sighting of Grace was not on a public street. It was entering the building of the man who had been with her that night. When police first spoke to Kempson, he lied. He told officers that after their date, he and Grace had gone their separate ways. He suggested nothing unusual had happened, but the CCTV made that impossible to sustain. Once investigators had the hotel footage, the timeline after Grace disappeared began to harden around him. On the morning of December 2nd, cameras tracked him leaving the hotel, buying a large suitcase and cleaning products, hiring a car, later going on another Tinder date while Grace's body was still in his room, then renting a rug doctor carpet cleaner, and eventually wheeling luggage down to the vehicle that evening. The next morning he was seen buying a shovel and later washing the rental car before returning it. That sequence is one of the most devastating parts of the whole story because it strips away the defense's preferred emotional framing. The defense would later argue that Grace's death happened during consensual sexual activity that went catastrophically wrong. But even if you set aside the legal question for a moment, the behavior afterward matters. He did not call emergency services. He did not report an accident. He did not tell hotel staff. He did not tell police when first asked. Instead, according to the Crown and the evidence, he searched, cleaned, photographed, transported, buried, and lied. The prosecution would later describe what he built afterward as a labyrinth of storytelling and lies. By December 8th, police publicly announced that the evidence gathered had established Grace was no longer alive, and that the investigation had become a homicide inquiry. That same day, they said they had identified and secured a vehicle of interest. The next day, after investigative work led them to Scenic Drive in the Waitakere Ranges, officers found a body they believed to be Grace's. New Zealand police said the formal identification process would follow, but based on the evidence already gathered, they expected it was her. It was. The post-mortem findings destroyed the idea that this was some vague sexual misadventure that no one could fully understand. Pathologist evidence later heard by the jury said Grace had been strangled and had bruising to her arms and chest consistent with being restrained or pinned down. Considerable force would have been required. The pressure on her neck, the court heard, would have needed to continue for 4 to 5 minutes to kill her. That duration matters enormously. It is not a split-second accident. It is sustained violence. It is enough time for someone to realize exactly what they are doing and still continue. And that is precisely why the prosecution hit so hard on intent. Under New Zealand law, consent is not a defense to death. The Supreme Court later made clear that once murderous intent was established, consent could not excuse what happened. The court also noted that even if Grace had consented to some manual pressure for sexual gratification, nothing Kempson told police suggested she had consented to the infliction of bodily injury likely to cause death. The pathology, the internet searches, the photographs, the disposal of her body, and his shifting lies were all deeply inconsistent with an innocent accident narrative. The trial began in November 2019 and lasted about 3 weeks. The defense leaned heavily on the claim that Grace died during consensual rough sex and that Kempson then panicked. The Crown answered with the physical evidence, the timeline, the post-mortem findings, the searches, the photos, the concealment, and his repeated lies. After roughly 5 hours of deliberation, the jury found him guilty of murder on November 22, 2019. It was a unanimous verdict. The emotional impact in court was immediate and profound, especially for Grace's family, who had been forced to sit through weeks of testimony that many observers felt put Grace herself on trial. When Kempson was sentenced in February 2020, the judge imposed life imprisonment with a minimum non-parole period of 17 years. That is a serious sentence, even in a jurisdiction where life imprisonment for murder is mandatory, and reporting at the time described it as one of the longer minimum terms imposed in New Zealand. The judge said Grace had been particularly vulnerable, that Kempson was in a position of total physical dominance, and that she had trusted a stranger who then killed her. It was not framed as some blurred or ambiguous encounter. It was framed for what it was: fatal violence carried out by a man with overwhelming physical control over a woman who had no meaningful chance to protect herself. The case did not end there. Kempson appealed his murder conviction and sentence, but the Court of Appeal dismissed that appeal in December 2020, and the Supreme Court later refused him leave to appeal further in June 2021. The official courts of New Zealand summary is blunt. The application for leave to appeal was dismissed. By that point, the murder conviction was no longer a matter of public suspense. It stood, and once name suppression finally fell away, the public learned even more about who Jesse Kempson was. The Supreme Court's December 2020 judgment recorded that, while his name had remained suppressed because of 2 additional pending trials, both had by then concluded. In one, he was convicted of threatening to kill, assault with a weapon, multiple assaults on a woman, and sexual violation against a former partner. In the other, he was convicted of raping another woman he had met on Tinder. In 2023, a further Supreme Court application connected to those matters was deemed dismissed after a notice of abandonment was filed. That history did not make Grace's case easier to hear, but it did make the pattern harder to ignore. The public response to Grace's murder was enormous. Vigils were held across New Zealand. Auckland landmarks were lit in white ribbon imagery. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern's apology became one of the defining political moments of the case. Grace's family later said that although she had only spent a short time in New Zealand, the country had taken her into its heart, and that in some small way she would be forever a Kiwi. The warmth shown to her family was real, but so was the anger, especially at the way the defense narrative forced Grace's private life and supposed sexual preferences into public argument after she could no longer speak for herself. That anger became part of a larger legal and cultural debate. In 2020, Grace's family publicly supported moves in the UK to stop defendants from leaning on so-called rough sex claims to explain away serious harm and death. The UK government later codified that principle in the Domestic Abuse Act, clarifying that a person cannot consent to serious harm, or by extension their own death, for sexual gratification. Grace's case was one of the high-profile killings repeatedly cited in that broader push. Her legacy also became active, not just symbolic. Grace's family and friends raised a record amount for White Ribbon UK, which campaigns to end male violence against women. And the Love Grace handbag appeal was created in her memory, collecting handbags filled with toiletries and essential items for women escaping abuse. That matters because it means her story did not stop at grief or outrage. It was turned into something practical, something that tries, in however small a way, to protect other women who may be standing at the edge of danger and not yet know it. There is one more painful layer to this story. Grace's father, David Millane, the man who stood before cameras in Auckland pleading for help, then later sat through the trial of his daughter's killer, died of cancer in November 2020. By then, Grace had already become one of those names that lives far beyond the original headlines. Not because people were obsessed with the killer, but because something about the case felt brutally modern. A dating app, a city center, a hotel room, a defense strategy built around consent, a digital trail of lies, and a young woman whose future ended in a place she had every reason to believe was safe. And that really is why this case still lands so hard. Grace did everything people are told is normal. She traveled. She met someone in public. She spent the evening in busy venues under cameras. She moved through a city where almost every step could be tracked later by police. Yet none of that prevented what happened once the date crossed the threshold into private space. The case is terrifying not because it is incomprehensible, but because it is so legible in hindsight. The timeline is clear, the choices are visible, the lies are documented. And still, the one person who cannot answer the most important questions is Grace herself. Thank you to everyone who watched this video. We truly hope this story mattered to you. And if you'd like to support the channel and help us continue creating content, please like the video, leave a comment, share it, and subscribe to the channel. Your support really makes a difference, and we genuinely appreciate every person who helps keep these stories from being forgotten.